very emotional.
Yep.
All right, so maybe we can get started. I'm Matt Belvick. I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. As if a global pandemic wasn't enough, businesses are now facing recessionary pressures that will limit budgets and shine a light on non-revenue producing departments. For legal departments, this likely means wearing more hats than ever before, despite an arguably bigger workload spanning business objectives, policy development, and the management of mental health concerns, all areas impacted materially by recent world events. Today, we're joined by Richard Carty, VP Legal and General Counsel at EL Financial, Wendy Kelly, General Counsel and a current CEO Law lawyer, and Steve Monk, founder and CEO of CEO Law. We'll address the biggest challenges and opportunities facing legal departments today and learn what General Counsel are doing to manage the mounting pressure and workload. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please send them through the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them throughout or at the end of the webinar. So maybe we can just start with some introductions. I'd love to go around the room and have each of you tell the audience a bit about yourself and both your legal and general counsel backgrounds. Richard, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So Richard Carty, I'm General Counsel, and I'm also at the moment head of HR at Empire Life, which is a subsidiary of the parent company EL Financial, which is the company where I get paid from. And I have been doing this role for a long time, for intermittently over 25 years. I also sit on the board of a public shipping company called Algoma Central Corporation, and I'm the chair of the corporate governance committee of that company. The companies that I work for are all controlled by one family in Toronto who live in Toronto. So I've been effectively working for the same family for almost all of my professional career. I have been very blessed to work for them. I have a great job, and I'm very lucky. So that's a bit of my background.
Perfect. Wendy?
Hi there. I sort of have the exact opposite background. I have traveled about and been a general counsel for various companies. I started my career at Torrey's as a litigator, moved over to BMO Nesbitt Burns to manage some significant litigation, and then spent 10 years at the bank in various roles, which at the end included corporate governance when Sarbanes-Oxley became law. Since then, I've been the general counsel of a pharmaceutical company, BioVale, which was Eugene Melnick's. Eugene Melnick had founded, and then I went on to Kruger Products. And since then, I have been working with CEO Law in a fractional CLO law position, which means that I have the pleasure of working for different clients all the time. They're usually extended mandates. So in other words, 3 to 6 months I would step in as the interim chief legal officer while they source for their next chief legal officer. And as such, I probably bring a different perspective. I hope that helps.
That's great. And last but not least, Steve?
Yeah, so I've had kind of a long and winding path. Not always as a lawyer. I started as an engineer, and I worked at Lockheed, which is a world-leading aerospace company. And that really gave me an appreciation for technology, and also made me decide that there were other engineers I should leave that job to. So I left and I became a lawyer, and I worked at Davies Wharton Beck, which is a big Bay Street law firm, one of the Seven Sisters, so a very well-regarded firm. And so I got to see how big law firms operate from being in the inside. And then I left there and decided to go into business. I decided that working in business was really the right path for me. So I started working at large international companies, and then gradually made my way to more entrepreneurial ventures. And that gave me a real appreciation working in business for how traditional law doesn't always work well for businesses and for business operators. And along the way, when I was working as an executive, I was often asked to handle the in-house counsel duties as well as doing my job as an executive. And, you know, that seemed to suggest that someone could easily do both those jobs. And my personal view is that, you know, the general counsel role is too much for one person, let alone just kind of moving it off to the side and getting somebody who may have a law degree to look after that. And, you know, I just think that that kind of an approach speaks volumes about how in-house counsel can be misunderstood and not appreciated the way they should be. So I think, you know, that's going to be an important part about today, the pressures on in-house counsel and everything they're asked to do. And then finally, in 2017, I founded CEO Law, and I work primarily on the sales side and the management side. And I leave the lawyering to people like Wendy, who are far better at that than I proved to be.
Awesome. So right into our first question, from each of your perspectives, what do you think is the biggest pressure facing general counsel today in the midst of economic uncertainty and a potential recession? Wendy, do you want to start this one?
Sure. So keep in mind that I work for both large companies and also smaller companies that are entrepreneurs. And so the pressure they may face is different. But in every aspect, we operate with a business hat first. And with the economy the way it is, and with the coming out of the pandemic, I think the two major issues are labor and a change in the market conditions that can impact the revenues of the company, to try and do things with less, or, you know, renegotiating certain contracts with suppliers and vendors. So those would be the two things I would highlight: labor shortage, different mentality towards labor, both in the businesses and in the legal departments. And then secondly, the change in the economic conditions are putting a strain on the businesses.
Makes sense. Let's go to Richard next.
Well, I would agree completely with what you just said. We have noticed that the cost of talent has just exploded, and this would apply to this is mostly relevant to Empire Life, where you have a lot of finance professionals, IT professionals, and certainly lawyers. And we have a team of about 7 lawyers, and the cost for lawyers, whether it's internal or external, are just exploding. And our view of the cost of internal lawyers is this, and our view is it is what it is. We hire very good lawyers, and we have to suck it up and pay them appropriately. So the salaries and benefits have ticked up in the legal area for sure. In fact, we just did, as we're preparing for our budget for 2023, we're upping some of the comp for our lawyers. And the reason is it's just as Wendy was saying, Empire Life is a very mature business. It's this upcoming year will be its 100th anniversary. And so the challenges that we face are very different from entrepreneurial startups that have, you know, much more exposure to short-term volatility and spikes in labor costs. But our sense of this is we have a shareholder who thinks long-term. We can handle some volatility. So as we think about our cost structure, both in the legal department and outside, across the broader corporation, we look at our costs relative to what we expect our ROE and our net income to look like, and it's a balancing act. How much can you spend in a pretty crappy market for a life insurance company in the life insurance industry, so that you're keeping your momentum, you're not withdrawing, but you're able to still deliver a reasonable ROE and shareholder net income. So for us, it's a balance, and the downside of losing lawyers is obvious. You lose productivity, you are disruptive to the business units who are trying to produce revenue. So it's always a game, and I don't know how many executive meetings we've had as we prepare for our 2023 budget. Probably 3 times a week we talk about getting that balance right, and there's a trick to it, and our world is different than what Wendy's experienced, because we have been around for a long time, and we can take a bit of a downturn.
Steve, anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in general, I've always felt like the biggest pressure, the biggest challenge for general counsel is that they get asked to do too much with too little resource. And with the recession and rising interest rates and falling markets and everything else that's going on, you know, from global conflict to pandemics to sickness everywhere, to just general malaise about the weather. Rainy day today is a perfect example of that. I think that the pressures on counsel have only increased, because I view that, you know, lawyers rather, are helpers. So people come to lawyers when they have times of need. And I think right now there's more need than ever. And at the same time, resources are being taken away. So it's, like I said, a classic case of being asked to do more with less. And then I think that there are broader pressures that are facing GCs as well. We're going to talk a bit later about mental health challenges, for example, but I'll mention it just briefly here. I often think that general counsel are kind of like parents, that it's their job to take care of everyone else and maybe forget about themselves. And so all of the things that are causing people stress, like global events and local events and family events and everything that's going on in a company, these can all land in the GC's lap to try and find and implement a solution. And, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure to look after everyone. So I think that on top of the need to do more with less, there's also this pressure to try and make everyone happy when there may be lots going on in the world where, people are not really feeling happy.
That's the perfect segue into our next question, which is, as general counsel are asked to do more with less, what do you recommend be done in-house? And what do you think will be better supported externally in order to maximize a legal department's effectiveness? Maybe we can go to Richard to start this one. Richard, it sounds like you're muted. Still muted. Maybe let's go to Wendy to start this one
then. Excuse me. So what do we do with less? We're always working with less, in my humble opinion. And you have to be creative. Since the pandemic, there is definitely a requirement or an expectation to be creative in terms of coming into the office or being virtual. There also is a new culture of what hours people work and the expectation to be available 9 to 5 versus have more flexibility. So you also, this isn't a plug for CEO Law, but it's the reality that you need to have different alternative legal service providers, ones that can pop in and really have no commitment, who can do the work at a reasonable rate, have the expertise. And that is what we do at CEO Law. We have very specific, talented lawyers who have usually are on the later end of their career, a seasoned judgment that can step in and add value. So when I'm working as a CEO Law lawyer, as a chief legal officer in a fractional role, helping a company out, I can also pull in, as any other law firm, talent to review a contract or otherwise that is more efficient than making an argument for bringing in staff full-time or going to a law firm. That's not to discredit the law firms and the value that they bring, but there is a skill base where if you've been in-house, you understand the business aspects and from an in-house perspective as a lawyer. And that's where I would get creative with alternative legal service providers.
Perfect. Richard, do we have you back yet? Doesn't seem like it. That's okay. We'll go to Steve.
So clearly a real pressure on lawyers is learning to use technology. It's a really difficult thing, but hopefully we can find our way through it. When I think about the question of, what should general counsel do themselves and what should they look to others to support them on, I really think that everybody's always at a risk of getting caught up in the day-to-day and losing focus on what are really the highest priorities, the important things. And so I kind of think about a 2x2 matrix where you've got, things that are urgent and things that are important. And of course, you should be focused on the things that are important. But I think too often it's the urgent things that may be less important that take up too much of the day. And sometimes even non-urgent things that are less important take up the day if somebody's really pushing hard. And maybe they view it as being really important, but it's not in the overall, spectrum of the company. the goal to me should be to focus on the important tasks. And so, I think general counsel should be involved in strategic work, and they should really be looking to align their work with the overall business goals of the company. I thought it was really interesting when Richard was talking about, being on boards and looking at short-term investments in labor costs against long-term return on that investment. And I think, that's strategic work and exactly the kind of thing that I think general counsel should focus on, and clearly things that make Richard a core part of the executive team there. So I think the things that should be outsourced are day-to-day routine work that's just taking up too much time for general counsel and taking up too much of their team's time as well. And then also there's going to be specialized work that should be done by subject matter experts. So I think for every general counsel, they're going to run across situations where they don't have the expertise, and so they should take that outside. And then also there's going to be projects that pop up where it's going to be an immediate spike in demand, where you just, there's no increase in the resources. So I think that kind of project work also is a good thing to think about taking outside. And then, to Wendy's point, when you go outside, of course, it has to make economic sense. It has to work for the company, because, it's no general counsel are just given carte blanche in terms of what they spend to support the business. And so I think what they really need is access to high quality lawyers at an affordable price point, with low cost. And then I also think that what's important is to get responsiveness and a great experience, kind of what Wendy was alluding to when she said, when you work with an ALSP, you can get somebody who's solely devoted to the work that you need to have done. And I think that's really important for responsiveness and to give you a great customer experience. So that's kind of my summary. Hopefully I've filibustered long enough that how to be heard, and we can go from there.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you back.
Well, it was Matt who had the IT solution to unplug and plug back in. So that's all I did, and now it seems to be working. So I was going to say that this question kind of flows nicely from what I previously said about finding the right balance. What we do with our internal lawyers is we focus them on issues that are, for the most part, under our control. They're routine, they're predictable. So it'll be product work or distribution work or working on innovation, which we do all the time. And then where we would be more likely to send a file out is in connection with unpredictable types of files, like M&A activity or a capital markets exercise. But even when we try to keep the internal lawyers focused on areas that are important to the company, such as distribution and product development, they tend to be pretty niche-y. I mean, it's hard to find a really good insurance lawyer who's got that kind of experience, which frankly results in you paying a bit more dough. So that's our experience.
Perfect. Glad we were able to get your mic figured out. Kind of a related question, but this one's just directed specifically at Steve. In what ways do you see technology supporting legal departments in the near term?
Yeah, so technology is something interesting and clearly something we think about a lot. As a disruptive company, we try and involve technology in ways that may be a bit novel for the legal market. And, there are tech solutions out there that are designed to support companies get better organized. So things like contract management systems or, minute book management systems, things like that. And I do think that helping people get organized, that's a good use of technology. And it's not something that we're really so focused on. We're more focused on thinking about technology that can help companies become more efficient and help general counsel and their teams have better relationships with the teams that they serve. We think that's really valuable. And so an example of that might be technology that helps speed the review of sales contracts, for example. And that's something that we see a lot in companies, that general counsel and their teams are tasked with approving contracts, making sure that the company is protected. And in that kind of a situation, I think that there's there's a tension that we often see between the sales folks and the legal team and the CEO. And for the sales team, I mean, what they want is to have all of the contracts approved instantly because they want to get their commission. So they want, you know, as soon as the customer is ready to sign, they want that contract approved right away. The legal team, you know, they have to protect the interests of the company. And then the CEO wants the contract to be approved because, yeah, he wants that revenue to flow as well. But he or she also wants to have the risk, the risk assessed and the company properly protected. So, you know, that's kind of a difficult situation. And so we look at tech to see it, you know, to think about, are there ways that we can accelerate the review of contracts using playbooks? And the playbooks serve the function that the company's risk tolerances are kind of systemically identified, and then they can be applied. Rules can be applied in a very short period of time. And, you know, we think that that's something really valuable. And certainly it's been really well appreciated by our clients when they use that solution to, you know, speed the time from agreement to revenue, you know. And so that's what this solution really does. We do believe that technology is never going to be the complete solution, the full answer. And so that when we develop technology like that, we involve people as well. So there are people with expertise who are involved in the review, but it's done much more rapidly, much more efficiently because of the technology. And, you know, the people have to be involved because they have to turn their minds to special situations, which always seem to arise. You know, there's always some kind of nuance that somebody has to turn their mind to. We had a conversation just the other day with a large client who was looking at this kind of solution. And they said that they had tried machine learning in the past. And it was that very thing that tripped them up, that they found out that it just couldn't work because there were nuances that would come up, and they needed somebody, a human being involved to put their eyes on it. And in that particular case, it was around provisions of, it was wills, provisions of wills that might be drafted differently in different markets. And the wills were really important in this case because it was about, you know, making sure that they were properly looking after clients in a wealth management scenario. So, you know, that's a great example of where you can try and apply machine learning or artificial intelligence, but you need to have people involved as well. And so that's how we look at technology, a combination of the tech and the people in ways that can help General Counsel with the work that they do every day and improve the relationships that they have within their companies.
Thank you. What can you suggest to General Counsel currently selecting a legal services provider? Let's start with Richard on that one.
Well, my experience is that we canvass the map. It depends on the nature of the file, but we are in all cases very cost conscious, and General Counsels are in this day and age are given a budget. It's our way of dealing with General Counsel's budget includes the amount that we spend on professional services, which is perhaps unusual for other companies because, you know, it's unpredictable. It's not under the control of the General Counsel. But notwithstanding that, we do create a budget so that there is an expectation that you're going to manage it. So it's not a free for all. There's a dollar amount that we expect the General Counsel to work to. As a result, there is pressure to look around to get the best bang for your buck. Some services you are just going to pay. Like if it's a capital markets transaction, you're going to pay. But we still ask for a discount, and we typically get a discount. For more traditional litigation work, it's a question of canvassing the map and getting good quotes and doing RFPs and doing all you can to get the fees that you think are still going to deliver the services that you are going to require. And the other thing I would say is it's not a bad idea to have your business unit that you're providing the service for involved in the selection of external counsel if you go that way, because it gets everybody on the same page and people are engaged on the same topic. And we follow that practice to make sure that the business unit is happy with the external counsel, whether it's selected. And we have used CEO law on various files very successfully at a price point that works nicely for the work that's being done. So it's a good alternative. Just a little pitch for Steve.
Wendy?
You know, I really would just reiterate what Richard said. It's very specific to what the matter is. As he suggested, capital markets tends to sort of command a certain level of law firm expertise and depth and breadth of experience with the juniors, et cetera. But there are other matters such as contract reviews or, and then not even necessarily routine, but ones that an alternative legal service provider would have specialization in and maybe more cost effective. So you sort of have to look at each of the matters you're trying to outsource, and where is unfortunately the best bang for your buck. Like Richard said, we all have to manage to a budget, and we have to be strategic about how we do that. And looking at all the various alternatives is an important element. And sometimes it's more important, as he said, to have your in-house counsel working on the routine work that is coming through that they know well, and outsourcing the non-routine work that somebody else does every day because they do it for more clients and are more effective than having your in-house counsel always doing the strategic work and outsourcing the more routine work. So it really is an analysis of what is available out there and at what price. And it's not necessarily the cheapest price, but you certainly should keep that in mind.
Steve, maybe I can ask you that question from a slightly different angle, but do you suggest legal departments work with multiple external law firms as a way to keep them honest? That's kind of something that I've heard people say repeatedly, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to follow up a bit on what Wendy said, and I do think that it ties in, like this notion that you don't want the cheapest lawyer, I totally agree with. I always say to people, you don't want a cheap lawyer, you want a great lawyer at great value. And so I think that's the way to come at this. And then in terms of the things that, external counsel can help with, I do think that sometimes it's overflow when you're just buried. And so that can be contract review. Sometimes it's specialized work, like if Wendy's acting as a chief legal officer, like I just think you're not going to find a better chief legal officer to come in and help you out based on the experience that she has, if you happen to be in a situation where you need that. And there are various other things that fit into that same category. If people need compliance expertise, or if they're working through a sticky situation and they need somebody who's been in that situation before. And then there are projects. There's always going to be projects that come up where that's the kind of thing where you should choose somebody who can deliver that expertise at high value. In terms of, should general counsel be open to working with multiple law firms? I would absolutely say that they should. And as Richard mentioned earlier, they scan the market and they try and find the best provider of the solution, given all of the things that are important to that solution. And so, I think that by having multiple potential providers, you can leverage information, and maybe you can get a better rate. Maybe you can negotiate a bit. There's also the issue of what if your lawyer's, the one you depend on doesn't have availability at that time? Or what if they don't have the expertise that you really need? Or what if they can't deliver on your timeline? I think that experimenting gives you a flavor and a taste of alternatives. And when you try that, you might decide that you like an alternative better than what you may have tried before. Just recently, as an example, I spoke to a general counsel who had been relying on big firms for specialized matters, and the lawyers there had increased their rates from $1,300 an hour up to $1,700 an hour. And I just think, that is unbelievable to me. And, the explanation that the general counsel was given was that, the costs in the firm were increasing because of the pay increases on the labor market that we talked about before. And so the only answer was to pass along, that increase in cost, just pass it along to the client. And, if you think about that for a second, even if the rate increase was $300 an hour, I talked about 400, but let's say it's just 300 an hour, and you apply that across a 2,000 hour work year. That's going to be just an increase of $600,000. And at that rate of $1,600 an hour, again, if you applied that across a normal work year of 2,000 hours, that's $3.2 million. I mean, does it make sense for General Counsel to be relying upon lawyers that if you amortized it over the whole year, it would be millions of dollars for that kind of advice? In my mind, that's just out of sync with the rest of the world. And it's not responsive to the reality where General Counsel have more they have to do and more support that they need, but they are constrained by budgets. So that's where I think having alternative solutions available, that can protect you so that you don't ever feel like there's just no choice, but to pay what may be, an outrageous amount of money in my estimation. And instead you give normal market forces a chance, and you've got alternatives to make sure that you get what you need, but you get it at a value point that is aligned with your business.
Perfect. Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we would definitely work with different law firms to keep them honest. I mean, we just do that, and we will happily tell firm A that if you want our business, we expect a certain percentage discount from your rate, and we expect it and we get it. And if they don't want to give the discount, they don't get the work. I would also say that Steve's point about increasing costs of lawyers, in my world, you can't reflect those increases and pass them on to the clients. You just can't. So it makes it very difficult for the General Counsel to figure out how to manage that additional cost that they're going to be exposed to, because you can't pass it on. So it's tough for General Counsel, particularly in this very inflationary environment. And it's not, I'm sure everybody in this call or who are listening will know, we're getting increases in the cost of our external auditor, significant increases for all of our public companies and private companies, and we can't pass any of those costs on. These are becoming embedded into our cost structure, and we can't do much about it. So it's a challenge, and it's more challenging for General Counsel, I think, than it ever has been.
Wendy, anything you'd like to add?
No.
All right.
We said it all.
Perfect. So this question is for Richard. With diversity, equity, and inclusion being such a relevant topic these days, what are your organizations doing, or what are you seeing legal departments doing to address that challenge?
It's a very good question, and I'm not sure it's strictly a question about a legal department and what they're doing about it, but coincidentally, because I am responsible for HR at Empire Life, I'm responsible for our D&I program. Our program is just over 2 years old. We were a little late putting our program together. We had talked about it probably for 2 years, and nothing was happening. And then all this unrest. I mean, the United States is perpetually in a state of unrest, but a few years ago it was really bad with the stuff going on with George Floyd, and it was such a big deal for everybody that we felt as an executive that we really got to get moving on this, because we're a little light in what we're doing on diversity and inclusion. And so we made a lot of progress. We put together a program 2 years ago that was very deliberate. It was new to everybody, including our board, including our executive. So we took very deliberate steps at each stage to sort of grow slowly, get people comfortable talking about issues that were unfamiliar issues to most people. Our demographic is such that the head office of Kingston, or of Empire Life, is located in Kingston, which is not a diverse environment. And what's happened during COVID, perhaps coincidentally, but nicely, is we've been able to recruit people because remote is in and hybrid is in. We've been able to recruit people from across the country and sort of eliminate this focus and concentration on the demographic that exists in Kingston. So we now have a D&I website, on a D&I resource page on our Empire Life website. the role that the legal department has played, I would say, has been twofold. We have revamped all of our corporate policies to be more D&I oriented, if you will, try to eliminate gender discrimination or gender influences in the way that we might be doing our recruiting. And so we've made a lot of progress there, and the legal department will help vet those sorts of documents to make sure that they're reflecting what we want from a D&I point of view. And the other interesting one is we didn't call our program diversity, equity, and inclusion. We called it D&I. We were a little nervous about the equity word being used in our program for a couple of reasons. We were just about to commence our pay equity review, which from a compliance point of view, we're required to report on. And we wanted to have a good handle on whether we had pay equity issues, which turned out we didn't have any pay equity issues. And the other part of using the equity expression is it means a lot of different things to different people. So our plan in 2023 is to do a lot of learning and training on what equity could mean for a company like Empire Life. And then we're going to put that word in our program and explain why it's in our program and what it means to Empire. And our legal department has been helpful trying to source research and so forth to get a handle on what that word might mean for our company. So it's been a very deliberate program with legal department participation to try to get it right. And it's been a very interesting exercise, I must say.
Very interesting. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the only thing I wanted to ask Richard actually is about what he's seeing around how important that is to young workers, because I know that we've had this conversation before, and what he was finding was that, yeah, it's really important. And so I think the work that Empire has been doing, I believe, has really been important in terms of their ability to attract people. But maybe you can tell us some more about that, Richard.
Well, I should have mentioned that. Yes, good. It's a good question. One of the recruiting has been a real challenge for Empire Life. We have about 1,000 employees now, and in 2022, it's a shocking number, but in 2022 we will have recruited nearly 400 employees. So we have a huge turnover, and I don't think it's uncommon in the insurance and financial services industry. So one of the initiatives that we've commenced is trying to restructure the way we do recruiting, and it includes talking about our D&I program. We get feedback from recruiters, hiring managers at the executive level who are interviewing candidates. And like I had one about a month ago, it was an executive, a VP, trying to recruit for a manager level position. She wrote us a note saying, I've interviewed 4 people, 2 of whom are keen to work at Empire because of what we're doing on D&I. And I would not say that we are progressive, frankly, on a comparative basis with other employers. We're trying to do the right thing in a way that makes sense for Empire Life and what makes sense for our internally, but also externally. And it does have an impact, and I think a positive impact the way we're trying to talk about the way Empire feels about D&I, and we don't do it in a defensive way. We say we started slowly. We've got these things going on. We probably got 30 people in the company who participate in our work streams, and they talk about it externally. And the level of commitment from the board, from the executive, is super high. So it's an easy program to get support for, and it does have an impact on recruiting. So yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you. Shifting gears just a little bit, this question's for Wendy. Environmental, social, and governance standards reporting is a challenge for many public companies right now. Wendy, given your experience in this space, is that something that you can comment on a little bit? You're just muted, sorry.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
ESG is an evolving landscape for public companies, and there are no real guidelines out there yet. The Canadian Securities Administrators did issue a draft national instrument about a year ago, referred to as 51107, on climate-related issues. And they set out a proposal to follow certain a standard that is aligned with financial reporting. And then other standards organizations have come out and tried to merge other standards with the TFCD, which is the financial reporting standard. And now it's Canadian Securities Administrators have backed off to allow more time to look at what is the standard that a public company should be reporting to. And so in the interim, companies are finding that they have to report and measure against various standards. For example, I've worked for an energy company, and they may be having to track 3 or 4 standards in their reporting, or another company that has fuel emissions issues are struggling with what is the standard, what is the right standard. And of course, these measures take up time and effort within the business because they're having to track it. It goes beyond a legal department issue. But it's just a sign of the times that, I mean, we're very excited, I think, in the world to have ESG standards and to be working towards climate control and emissions, and anxious for companies to report. We would just like to see a more alignment on what is the standard that works best.
Perfect. Thank you, Wendy. So I'm going to bring the conversation back to something Steve was alluding to a little bit earlier. Obviously, COVID-19 brought both mental health and remote work environments to the forefront of issues that need to be dealt with in a more meaningful way. There hasn't necessarily been a consistent approach to tackling these issues. So I'm interested in understanding, how are these issues being managed in your organization or the legal departments that you work with? Richard, do you want to start?
Sure. Again, I wouldn't say it was strictly a legal department issue, as everyone would imagine. But when COVID struck, we had what I would describe as a fairly routine employee assistance program that was, available with many third-party providers. But when COVID struck, we decided pretty early on to put together a robust mental health program. We put it in pieces, if you will. We had a site that was devoted to our employees to give them access to resources. We engaged a psychiatrist from CAMH. We enhanced our broad EAP program. The psychiatrist at CAMH was available to oversee the development and the build of our program to make sure that it was robust, because we wanted it to be robust. And what we found was that psychiatrist happened to be also available for individual counseling, which we encourage people to access if they needed it. And the approach that we took, have a robust program that everyone can benefit by, but at the same time, we have what we call business partners who are HR employees who are close to what's going on they're in the weeds on what's going on in the various business units. And we had a handful of employees, say out of 1,000, we had a handful of employees who we know before COVID struggled with isolation and lack of connection. And so we were, without being intrusive and so forth, we tried to be really on top of it for those handful of employees that we know we're going to struggle. And we were lucky that we were able to get through COVID. And I'll tell the story, and it sounds like I'm boasting here, and I don't mean to sound like that, but we have just been doing some work in the last year on what we call our employee value proposition. It's one of those concepts that goes along with your mission, your values, and so forth. So the way we approach the determination of what that EVP might look like, we go out to the business units, leadership and managers, and say, what do you think the employee value proposition at Empire should be? Well, we've just sort of finalized it. It's a paragraph long, like 3 lines long, and the word care is repeated. Empire is a place that cares about its employees, its clients, and its advisors. And we want it to be a caring place to work, to have a culture of caring, and so forth. So when we engage business unit leaders to help us determine what that EVP might look like, the mental health program that was put in place was often referred to as that's Empire. You guys care about your teams and you prove it with what you do. So it was just a very interesting output, if you will, of the way we put our program together. But it's a big deal, and we're still we're still offering webinars and the full complement of resources because people still worry about spikes and so forth, and we're trying to make sure that we handle it properly.
Yeah, that's great. That's very interesting and a super proactive approach to handling those issues. Wendy, what do you think about that question?
I commend Richard and his organization for taking employees' mental health seriously, and particularly looking at those even before COVID who struggled with some isolation issues, etc. So hats off to you. In some of the organizations that I've worked for or have, since or during COVID, they have varying approaches to how to react. And, COVID also hit the businesses hard. So some had to close down completely and employees were laid off. And then bringing them back has been difficult. But so I think what I'm trying to say is that when you don't have a formal plan, you should still have an informal approach to the reality that we have come out of a pandemic that has impacted people, and to be sensitive to those impacts. And it's not business as usual anymore, whether it's for the lawyers or whether it's for those individuals working within the organization. As lawyers, we have to manage often, exiting employees when a company is on a downturn, or work with HR for the discipline. And I highly encourage organizations, and see it in many of the ones that I work for, a strong sensitivity to making sure everyone's okay, particularly when people are working virtually. The current client I'm working with I've observed is doing an excellent job of just checking in. They're primarily all virtual as a result of the pandemic, and checking in, and a less formal program, but certainly an awareness program. There's also organizations that are available that have access to mental health providers, that you can access virtually, etc. But I think, whether it's a formal program or not, you have to be aware of it and attentive to it. Sorry, I'm tired.
Thank you, Steve. I know this is an important topic to you. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to, I think what Richard and Wendy have said already, it covers it off really well. And I too think that what Empire's doing is a great example that other companies could follow and should follow. I just wanted to add one more little point, which goes back to when I said that I think General Counsel, often they're kind of like parents, and their job is to keep everyone happy. And Wendy mentioned, a high sensitivity to others. And I think that, that can create its own pressures. I think it's a really hard role to be in, where, your job is to make an entire company, to be sensitive to their needs and try and make them, happy, and think of the others, but never yourself. And that's where I think, General Counsel, the folks in this audience, I would advise you also have to be careful and think about yourself and try and engage in, some self-care. And then a key, I think, is to try and be careful and assess yourself on a regular basis. So of course, diet and exercise and sleep and great relationships, all of these are going to be super important for anyone. But I also think it's important just to do a check once in a while, and, just check in with yourself and see how you're feeling. How is your own mental health? And then I think that's really important, so that if you realize that things are going a bit sideways, you can try and get the help that, everyone's going to need as early as possible. And, that help may involve, professional help or medical help or whatever it is. But I do think that the sooner the better. And so, thinking not just about the entire organization, but thinking about yourself as well as a general counsel, I think that's really important.
Thank you. So we've got one more question here before we just move into some closing thoughts. And I know some of this question is kind of already been covered in answers to others, but interested in if there's any additional thoughts on how the rising cost of legal resources are impacting General Counsel, the industry as a whole, and businesses as a whole. Does it mean that some things that maybe you have gotten done in the past just aren't getting done because things are too expensive? Steve, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Well, sure. I'll take the lead. So I think it's everything that we've spoken about before, where there's tremendous pressure on General Counsel, where there are more needs and less resources and more to do, and so this pressure builds around how are you going to cover off all of the things that need to be covered off, where there are budgetary pressures around, and that the pressure just being amped up by rising costs. And yeah, to your point, Matt, does it mean that General Counsel are going to work 24 hours a day? Or does it mean that, they're going to learn new areas of law so that they can cover off needs where they don't necessarily have the expertise, but they need to avoid the expense of external experts? Or is stuff just not going to get done? And, that's where I think none of those options sound very appealing and probably don't work. So there's a need for something in this environment where General Counsel can get the support they need from talented lawyers who have the expertise to really help them, but the value proposition also will work. And, that's where I think disruptive solutions come in, where, organizations can give General Counsel the help they need from people who have experience, not just in big firms, but also as General Counsel themselves. So they've, walked in the shoes of the General Counsel who need this help. And then the value proposition is going to be there so that people can, get the help they really need.
Perfect. Richard, anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think Steve's right. The pressures have been, this is probably the worst it's been in terms of the pressures for getting legal services at a reasonable cost. What we did, I feel like I may be repeating myself a bit, but what we did was we made a deliberate decision to make sure that we're spending the right amount of money on our internal resourcing so we don't lose them. And if that meant having an alternative service provider come in to sub in for a year or on a mat leave or whatever it may be, we would do that. But we had to spend enough money to make sure that we could service our business. And I would say maybe my situation is a little bit different, but because of the nature of my employer, because of the nature of Empire Life and its legacy, we're already trying to look out a year and see what the world looks like toward the end of next year as we plan for 2024. And I don't know whether we're going to continue to see more inflationary pressure. I actually think that we are going to. I think 23 is going to be more of the same, just lesser, but more of the same. And so we're trying to figure out what we can do about that. And I think that opens the door to alternative service providers to step in even more, because I was on a call today with one of our actuaries who's on our board. He says next year we're going to be 5% inflation. Like that's going to get, the result of that's going to be higher legal bills even next year. So this is not going to go away anytime soon. And we're already thinking about how we're going to adjust and bring in different providers to handle what we're planning on spending. So.
Perfect. So maybe we can move on to some closing thoughts as we approach 1 o'clock. I just wanted to give everyone a chance to wrap up and give any thoughts that maybe they haven't already articulated through the questions. Wendy, do you want to provide some closing thoughts?
Just along the lines of alternative service providers and increasing fees and inflation. We are all lawyers and we're working in a legal business. What I would encourage very, very strongly is businesses not have lawyers or try to do like they did to Steve in the beginning when he was a business executive and happened to be a lawyer, that they told him to wear two hats. And the reason for that is, you may be able to save money and you may think you're saving money, but the long-term risk of not having the proper personnel or in terms of legal personnel is significant. And, it may not be apparent in the moment, but it's I would suggest that or even believe that it's going to come back to haunt you. So the answer is not to cut legal or cut the legal services. It could be to think a little smarter about how you streamline them. What risks are involved in the smaller items, and having maybe paralegals work on them. But that would be my closing remark, that we have to maybe work a little smarter, or transverse to the alternative legal service providers more quickly and more independently, but to continue to use the legal services.
Great points. Thank you, Wendy. Richard, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I thought today's topics were excellent, if I may say so, and they fit with my world perfectly. So I have to say that the way that we were hitting these topics was really hit me personally, because we take D&I, we take mental health and managing legal costs very seriously. That's what we do. I do think that we are in for a bit of an uncertain 2 years that is going to make it tricky for General Counsel. And I think Wendy's got it right on. I would not, you have to convince your management team that they shouldn't be reducing their legal spend. They should be managing their legal spend in an environment which is very expensive and it's volatile. And I think it's going to be for a little while.
Thanks, Richard. Steve?
Yeah, so I think the points that have been made cover it all off. I just wanted to say some thank you. So Matt, thank you for moderating today. Really appreciate that. And then Wendy and Richard, I really appreciate you guys being on this webinar. I think that your insights are really valuable. And I think that the things that you've passed along today are powerful. And so thank you for that. And then for everybody who's out there, of course, thank you for attending. If there's anything I can do to help, please reach out. My contact information, it's on the CEO Law website or on LinkedIn. Please reach out. And by that, I don't mean just legal support. Of course, we can help with that. But if there's anything else that we might be able to do to help, sometimes it's an introduction, sometimes it's sharing what we're hearing in the market, sometimes it's just a conversation to hear about an issue and get our thoughts. And I'm always happy to have those conversations. So please reach out anytime.
Thanks, Steve. To all participants, thanks for attending today's webinar. A recording of the event will be distributed to all registrants later on today. So look out for that. Also, thank you to Wendy, Richard, and Steve for your time today. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yep, thank you.